Good morning once again, everyone. Rector Arundel here with Abel Spirited Me, and I am Abel. Today we are doing video 4 on the video series, The Book Sealed with 7 Seals. We're lucky to have Jason here with us. He's going to continue unloading some amazing revelations and big clarifications on some of the verbiage that's being used in the Bible and other literary works that are quite confusing to understand on your own. So he left us off with a very big concept, and I want to just continue right there. So thank you again, Jason, for being here, and I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we just covered days 2 and 3 somewhat, and hopefully we're comfortable with this notion of these long-living beings, before the flood and up to the flood, being more of a societal body, a collective that's anthropomorphized as a human individual. But that's the metaphorical basis. And so now I'd like to talk about days 6 and 7, which you can't talk about day 7 without also talking about day 1.
Okay.
And I kindly touched on day 1 in that when you look at day 4, it says that it's the greater light to rule the day. And Jesus saying, my kingdom is not of this world, and that he doesn't actually get his own kingdom until the next cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we have to start to address now is how these cycles, because they just repeat around and around, is how you distinguish the end from the beginning. How does that work? Is it just blunt, or is there overlap? And the way I've come to understand it irrefutably is there is overlap of almost an entire millennium.
Okay.
Millennium.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at day 6, right, which is toward the end, you have God creates man in his own image and in his own likeness. And so it's like, well, man, and then he says, male and female. And so this is Adam and Eve, our man.
So we're beginning a new cycle at that point, almost.
Yeah, so here we are toward the end of we'll call it the old cycle.
Right.
And yet here's Adam and Eve at the end of creation.
Right.
And so, people are like, well, wait a minute, Adam and Eve, that's where everything starts. Right?
Right.
And yeah, absolutely, that is correct. Adam and Eve is the beginning of this creation.
Now, so, for the sake of clarity, day 6 is around 2000 AD?
It starts at about 1000 AD.
Okay.
And goes to AD.
So we're basically right at the end of day 6. Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. We've got all 6 days now to reflect upon.
Right.
And so, and an interesting thing about day 6 that I think is really nice, and I do want to bring this up. I'm grateful that you prompted me, because we've got the creatures in the waters from day 5, but now in day 6 we've got creatures on dry land.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between the two is the waters being submersed in the waters, and like I just touched on about the flood, waters are the governance of men displacing the governance of God. It's basically tyranny.
Yes.
People act like, this, what the United States of America was about. They act like we just take it for granted. But when you really think about it, and you look back over world civilization, you see a lot of tyranny.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, everywhere.
And it hard-fought battle to dry off the land and actually have liberty. And so when you look at what Jesus Christ seeded and began, these spiritual life forms totally submersed in the tyranny of an empire.
Right.
And, when you study that history of what those early Christians endured, I mean, they used them for street lamps. They'd douse them with some crude kerosene of some kind and light them up. I mean, that was how useful Christians were to the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
They'd use in their gladiator for entertainment, let lions gnarl on them. I mean, it's starting the beginnings of spiritual life were brutal and a huge sacrifice that these early Christian believers endured but they did endure. And not only did they endure through patience and through sacrifice and through long suffering, gradually over time the forms of governance evolved. In the 1200s we have things like the Magna Carta and different things where certain rights of the individual are starting to be acknowledged and recognized by the governing bodies. And so when you have that transition from just abject tyranny to ultimately what culminated in what the founding fathers of the United States of America accomplished, which was pretty much total liberty.
Yeah.
And ultimately what the founding fathers accomplished was a culmination of that dry land, where now these spiritual life forms could evolve from the lower life forms to higher and higher expressions of spiritual life. And so when you compare like your Protestant denominations of Christianity and you compare them to the Catholic or what we have in Catholicism, they all have their place, and I'm not wanting to be derogatory about anyone because all life is crucial, especially when you have an ecosystem, and there is a spiritual ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But I do observe that the Protestant denominations are more passionate and more engaged in learning and understanding their Bible and in going out and preaching and encouraging other people to believe in their Savior Jesus Christ, and they do tend to be far more liberty minded, whereas Catholics are quite comfortable just submitting to authority. And so in general, as you assess all these different spiritual life forms, they all have their characteristics and the environment that they need. And Protestants are quite a bit more demanding of their rights and their liberties. And so they have evolved. People say, oh, the Dark Ages. It's like, well, okay, fine. But still, for things to progress, it's a change of perception. The Enlightenment era, it wasn't especially a religious thing, but it was very needful in altering the spiritual landscape so that more religious liberty ultimately would come about. And so in day 6, it culminated in the dry land of the United States of America. And so when God brings forth man, that's the pinnacle of development of living life forms, the spiritual life forms. And ultimately, God creates man in his own image and in his own likeness. And so when we learn the true nature of who exactly Adam and Eve and their posterity in fact are, then you can approach understanding God much better. And so when you understand that Adam is a governing body, well, that by then inference means that Elohim is a governing body, and that it's not a singular human person. You know, a lot of people make fun of the LDS theology because you've got some LDS people, and unfortunately this seems to be more the majority. They believe that Joseph Smith was teaching this notion that a single individual human person can actually become in their own entirety the Elohim of, you know, a planet somewhere.
Could you just tell the masses what you mean by Elohim?
When I say Elohim, it's like what you see in the creation account, where it's a singular flesh and bone composite of multiple individuals joined together as one. They're truly a body of one flesh, like a husband and a wife should be one flesh. But this Elohim union is not at the expense of the individual identity and sovereignty of those that are in that union. And so when God's speaking in the Bible and he says, let us make man in our own image and likeness, this is a plurality speaking. And a plurality speaking about a new plurality that's being formed. Adam and Eve are pluralities. And so the teachings of Joseph Smith Jr., they need to be understood in this sealed portion narrative or context in order to really understand what he was attempting to teach. Because Joseph Smith Jr., he understood this knowledge of the seals.
Nice.
And yet in his day it was absolutely just completely absurd. You know, there hadn't been the internet and exposure to all kinds of, you know, Christianity was extremely narrow.
Right.
You know, narrow and very reticent to go outside of the box, let alone encounter something that's absolutely paradigm shifting.
Right.
You know, we didn't have science that told us, you know, hey, the way you're interpreting these sacred texts, we've proven incorrect scientifically.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And now Christians are having to recognize that, you know, scientific truth is a force to reckon with, and I think it's got them kind of a bit more humbled in their place. And I think some of these ideas, you know, that Joseph Smith Jr. had, you know, they were just the Christians weren't ready for it, unfortunately.
Right, and they're still not ready for a lot of things.
No, and the nice thing of it is as long as they just stay in their space and don't try to you know, conjure up delusions, thinking they're needing to fight some dragon, because you know, if you don't understand, just chill about it. You know, the only way Christians really get in trouble is when they go and think these more advanced concepts are dragons that they need to slay.
Yeah, the soldier for Christ is an interesting concept that comes up a lot.
Yeah, and what they don't realize is when they're fighting the very object of what Jesus taught them to pray for, the coming forth of the fullness of the Father's kingdom, which is manifested through the Adam of the new world, and they fight against the Adam of the new world, they don't realize it, but they think they're trying to slay a dragon when they're in fact in league with the dragon fighting against Michael.
Very deep. I like it.
Yeah, and this is the heartbreaking conclusion that comes out of this new paradigm is you start understanding the actual tangible role that people fall into without consciously realizing it.
Well, you know, I'm big into subconscious programming, so you're absolutely right. What you're doing, not even realizing it.
Oh, and if people are starting to think, I love Christianity, I know there's good, I know there's value in it, I have to hold on to those core principles, but I can't shake this feeling that somewhere Christianity is just, it's not living up to what it was intended, and now we're suffering because of it.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and Jesus warned the Christians in Luke 12. He says, hey, if if when the men servants and the maid servants come to cause you to sit down to meat, and you fight against these servants that are bringing the kingdom, not only do they forfeit the blessings that somehow they think are guaranteed, God says they're going to be beaten with many stripes, And God doesn't give warnings just as a manipulative parent that isn't going to have what he said come to pass, Now, and in Romans 11, Paul, I believe, he says, God, if God's willing to cut off the natural branches of this olive tree, and then you're given an opportunity to be grafted in, you don't get high-minded, because, hey, God will be just as willing to go ahead and cut you off too.
Right.
If you don't bring forth meat for the Father's kingdom. And so this is kind of where you get to when you're looking at day 6, you're touching on this evolutionary track that Christianity's facilitated. And ultimately, they're praying, the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Everything Christianity was about was this betrothal of this promise that in some future time, the bridegroom would come and the marriage would take place. So the new covenant of the New Testament, it was a betrothal arrangement. And that's why you see things like, the parable of the 10 virgins. They wanted to have the oil in their lamps, and if they didn't, well, then they missed out. And you see things like the parable of the wedding supper. There's all these guests that are bidden to partake of this great unleashing of new information so that the fullness of the Father's kingdom can be established. The Bible encourages Christianity to be looking forward to better and more evolved things, but somehow they change things around to where we are the bride. We are everything. There isn't supposed to be anything more. And if anybody comes along saying there's new revelatory information, we'll just immediately assume they're trying to add something to the Bible, and they're going to be cursed.
Yeah, that's exactly
Never mind
right.
that the script they hinge on for that, it doesn't say that exactly. They're the ones adding that meaning in, and unfortunately they're bringing a curse on themselves, because now they're rejecting God's blessings that he promised them to be looking for. It becomes a self-defeating thing.
Now, I'm sorry. We have to cut this video short because you're talking about some really, really big things. And in order for you to answer some of my questions, we'll have to go into another video. For example, I would... Go ahead.
I've covered day 6 quite sufficiently. And so we can wrap this up as covering day 6.
Just as a teaser for next time, with your interpretations, I'm really curious what cohort of people is Adam and what cohort of people is Eve in this modern timeline. But let's save it.
Yeah, definitely. The precision it's breathtaking. It's incontrovertible.
You've got my attention, and I'm looking forward to the next revelation. But yeah, let's go ahead and cut this one off. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great.
All right, bye.